Welcome you, and I'm so glad that you've come. This is a little different than our normal Sunday school lessons. Brian, you can come join me. We have Brian and Danielle Warren here with us today. I'm going to embarrass Danielle and make you at least wave to everyone so you can come meet Danielle later. We're not going to make her get on stage. Brian is going to come join us, and you'll get to hear Pastor Brian preach in a little bit, but we thought we would use our Sunday school hour just to give a little bit of an update on the trip that me and my family just took. We were just with you guys in May, and then also spend some time just in sort of an informal way interviewing you, give people a chance to hear from you about the ministry in Mexico, and give you guys a chance to ask questions. So if you have questions for Brian, we'll try to make some time for that. But just to start off with, in May, you guys as a church sent me and my wife, which we're very grateful for, thank you for sending us, to visit Brian and Danielle, and the purpose of that was twofold. It was, one, just to spend time with them, to fellowship together as those who are in full-time ministry doing church planting and leadership development. Hopefully the encouragement was mutual. I know we benefited from it a lot. But we enjoyed getting a chance just to spend some concentrated time with you guys. And then secondarily, their church in the village of Mochicawi is in the process and really planting a church in another city, a larger city called Los Mochis. And that church has been going for 6-8 months, something like that, since you guys have been meeting there as a church. And they were baptizing and welcoming in their first members officially and kind of formalizing as a church. And our church, Redemption Hill, has been funding that church plant. We've been able to help them with the rental of their facility, with acquiring some different materials that they needed to get started. So our church is supporting and funding that church plant. So we wanted to get a chance to be there and celebrate with them as they welcome members and see what God has done. So I'll share just a couple quick pictures just from our trip. So if you're not familiar with where they're at in the nation of Mexico, Brian and Danielle are in the state of Sinaloa, which you can see there, and that's how many hours south of the border if you're driving?
About
10 hours south. So it's not a border town. So they're in the state of Sinaloa, and you can see there a little bit of a zoomed in map. Mochicawi is where Brian and Danielle live, and you said there's 30,000 people there in Mochicawi?
Yeah, close to that, yeah.
Close to that. So it's about like Ottawa.
5,000.
5,000. So a little smaller than 30,000. So 5,000 people in Mochicawi. So smaller town. Los Mochis is bigger, though.
Yeah, 300,000.
So 300,000 in Los Mochis. I got my numbers wrong there. So they live in Mochicawi, and that's 20-30 minutes out from Los Mochis, which is a larger city. Los Mochis has your Starbucks and your Walmart and your Home Depot and all of that good stuff, and an airport, which is great. So we fly in and out of Los Mochis when we go visit. But during our time there, what a lot of people have said, so what did you do while you were there? Well, a lot of people have said, so were you building something? And the answer is yes and no. We weren't doing any manual labor, but we were trying to build relationships. We spent a lot of time with people. So you see some of my kids and some other kids here at a birthday party. We spent a lot of time around tables with people. There's my daughter Grace with some others. A lot of people down there speak English. There's an English school. So if you ever want to visit and you don't know Spanish, it's okay, because there will be a lot of people that are eager to talk to you in English. So we got to spend a lot of time with people, meeting brothers and sisters in Christ, and even if they don't speak the same language with our tongue, we have the same language of the heart in terms of loving Christ, serving Christ. So we really enjoyed getting a chance to revisit some old relationships. My wife and I have been down there a number of times over the years, so we were able to reconnect with people we knew and also meet some new people. And meet some people, even like this young man who is studying for ministry, preparing for ministry. So one of the things you'll hear about from Brian that he's very involved in is not just evangelism of those who are not yet believers, but also training and discipling maturing believers so that they can carry on the work of the ministry, whether that be teaching a Sunday school class or being a deacon or just leading their family well, or perhaps being a pastor or a church planter. So he spends a lot of time with these men. So we were in different people's homes almost every night, which was great. We had a great time doing that, and this is how we spent a lot of our time together with brothers and sisters down there. And here you see Brian and Danielle have 2 children. Their son Dan is a pastor in Virginia, and he and his wife Mariana have 2 kids. And then their daughter Amy is married to Archimedes, I think is how you pronounce it. We call him Kimi. And his wife Amy, and they have 3 children there. We got to spend some time with them in their home. Here's the church plant, the building that they are renting in Los Mochis. and that is Redemption Bible Church. I like that name. So they are renting that facility, and I got a chance to speak there to a group of men at their men's. They do a men's meeting kind of once a month for men's ministry. So I got a chance to speak there, and then also got a chance on Sunday morning to preach at the church in Mochikawi. That's the Sending Church, where Brian and Danielle are based out of right now. And it's great preaching through a translator because Brian can edit and improve all of my sermons on the fly. So there you see the church body. They meet outdoors under a structure with fans, which is great, but it's a little different than the air conditioning that we enjoy here. But the love for the Lord that we saw there and the warmth of the church, it was a real blessing to be there together with them. And they were welcoming new members that day. So these are some believers who joined the church in Mochikawi the Sunday we were there. So that's their certificate that they give out to their new members. And then right after that service, we went back to Brian and Danielle's house, and they had a baptism service. So they had a number of young people baptized that day and had a big meal outside. So this is out behind Brian and Danielle's, and they built a small little pool that is a baptismal/swimming pool for the kids when baptisms are not in session. So this is Pastor Antonio. He's the other pastor there in Mochikawi, and he's doing some teaching, explaining what baptism is. And you see Brian, who graciously volunteered to be the one to get in the water when it was 110 degrees outside. So just serving us all by getting down in the water to do the baptisms.
Sacrificially.
Yeah, sacrificially. And then Sunday night, we went to the church in Mochikawi, or Los Mochis, rather. And so we got to be there with them for church service, and I got to preach again. And got to be with the believers there. And then they stood up and they formally welcomed their first members. So there's a number of extras. There's some people visiting the church that aren't sure yet if they're going to join. There were some people who are visiting from the Mochikawi church just to support what's going on. And then they had really their core group joining as members right there. So this is the fledgling church in Los Mochis, and these are their members. There's a lot of excitement as they just celebrate what God is doing there and come together as a church. And then, as they always do, we enjoyed dinner afterwards. This is outside. There's a little courtyard behind the building that they're renting that's part of that facility. And so we got a chance to enjoy dinner that evening with the church body. So that was our trip. That's just a brief highlight. We can tell you more stories if you're interested later. But mostly I want to spend our time talking with Pastor Brian. So I thought I'd just ask a few questions. But for those who don't know you, maybe just share, and I didn't warn you about this one, but maybe just give the short version, how you guys came to faith in Christ and how you guys got married and felt called into ministry and how you ended up in Mexico.
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you for your participation with us. I'll mention that again when everybody's together in the service. But since November, starting this new church and being able to have a location that we rent the first floor of that 3-story building and that patio out back, thanks to the sacrifices that you all have made to participate with us in seeing that church get off the ground. So I want to say thank you, first of all, before sharing. But also, yeah, just thankful to the Lord for working in our lives. Danielle and I both had, in our teen years, had opportunity to hear the gospel. And in my particular case, I was at a motorcycle rally with my dad where I heard somebody preach the gospel. And for the first time, heard about repentance. And went to a church afterwards that I had gone to Vacation Bible School at, not because my parents were Christians, but it was a good place for my mom to get 3 rowdy boys out of the house for a while. So she sent us to every Vacation Bible School around, and went to that church for a while, began to learn a little bit. A youth pastor kind of took me in as a long-haired redneck kid that was kind of, at that time I would say, shy. And but then he left, and it was I had a youth group of about 6 people, and since I was kind of awkward and didn't really grow up with them, I had a hard time, and it found that the crowd that was more accepting, sadly, was a different crowd running in a different direction. And so junior high, my early high school years, not a lot of fruit in my life, even to the point where I know God was working in my life. Whether I was truly saved then or he was just beginning to work in my life, I can't say for sure. But I think there was conviction, just not a lot of God's word in my life to know, to respond to that. So then through our high school, through early high school years, definitely living a lifestyle that was not pleasing to God. Danielle and I married when we were in high school. We were 17, I was a junior, she was a senior in high school. And so we became parents at 17 as well, not living for the Lord at that time, but my wife was invited to a ladies' Bible study by a friend who really wasn't interested in the Bible study, but her mom was kind of encouraging her to go, and she didn't want to go by herself. I think she only went once and never went back, but my wife Danielle just continued to go and to learn and to grow. And so through changes in her life, God got a hold of me, and one day I told her, we should probably find a church, and I wanted to be able to lead my family and didn't know how. And so we started going to a church, and at that time we had 2 children. We were 20 years old, so we had a 3-year-old boy and a 6-month-old girl, and began to study the Word, and God began to transform our lives. So the long story short, God got a hold of my life through a ladies' Bible study. Then there was a period of time where God began to work and grow our lives, and I was in an evangelical church where the gospel was preached, but it was kind of every Sunday was just a gospel presentation. There wasn't a lot of depth, nothing in the way of expository preaching. And I was just hungry for God's Word. Started reading through the Word. I was working nights, come home in the morning, sharing with Danielle the things God had been showing me from His Word. And I heard that you could go to places like Bible colleges and seminaries and just study the Word more. So we sold our house and moved to Kansas City so I could go to Bible college. At that time, I enrolled in an elementary education major because I was convinced I would never be able to stand up in front of adults and speak. But God dealt with me right away that what I called shyness, He called pride, and He could use my mouth if I would let Him. And after a semester there and being under expository preaching at Countryside, we joined Countryside shortly after moving to the Kansas City area, and changed to pastoral studies and began preparing for pastoral ministry. First convinced that the Lord would maybe have us go to some place in a small town in the United States. I was burdened for places that, a lot of guys get out of seminary and they'll go to a small town for a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 years, build up a resume, and always sense a calling to a larger church in a more comfortable place with a larger salary. And those smaller churches get used as kind of stepping stones and people get stepped on. And so I was burdened that we'd go to some place and just live our life in some place serving the Lord where maybe not a lot of people would want to go and fewer people would want to stay. And when you pray something like that, God ends up sending you to Sinaloa where not a lot of people want to go and even fewer people want to stay. But we actually made short-term mission trips into Mexico, into some areas in larger cities at first, but began to look at the opportunities to preach Christ in a place where nobody was going and staying and preaching Christ. And through some contacts, the Lord put us in touch with the place we ended up going to serve at first in 1999 in a small Mayo Indian village in Sinaloa, so 25 years ago.
So 25 years in Mexico. Started off in a very small town. So you guys been part of really a church revitalization. There was an existing work there, but it wasn't healthy. And you guys came in and labored there, poured yourselves into that church. And then what year was it that you moved to Mochicawi? Was that 2013?
Yeah, it would have been about then. We were there because we were 13 years in Hawata. We started the work in Mochicawi while still living in Hawata, driving back and forth. The guy that we were preparing to be pastor there had a daughter with a brain tumor, and he had to be gone for some long periods of time. She received treatment in the States. So I continued to preach there a lot longer than I would have otherwise after we started the new church. And then once he was established as a pastor, we went ahead and moved on to Mochicawi, where we've been for the last 12 years. Established a church there and burdened about not only seeing a church established in a place that was very dark, a center of religious festivals for the Mayo Indian traditional religion, but also seeing it as a place to train Latin American men to plant churches. Didn't want to continue to plant churches and go to different places and be the face of those churches. with this pale face gringo. I wanted to see Latin American men be the face of those churches and see Latin American men planting churches in Latin America and prayerfully from Latin America to other parts of the world. So that ended up being the place where we're still at and have had the opportunity through a pastoral residency program to bring guys in and train them and send them out and shepherd their families as they're now planting churches throughout Mexico and Peru.
So tell me about your experience at language school. What language school did you guys attend to learn Spanish?
Yeah.
I know the answer to this question, but...
Our language school is a small town in Sinaloa, Jawada. We moved in, a family of gringos, half a dozen Spanish words. I took Spanish for one semester in high school because back in the day they said you should have 2 years of a foreign language if you're going to go to college. I'm not sure why. I was not college bound at that point. I was not sober a lot of mornings when I went to school. So after one semester I got out. I said, who needs to learn Spanish? When will I ever learn to learn Spanish? So
famous last words, right?
at 29, almost 30 years old, we moved into a town where they only spoke Spanish and the Mayo Indian language and learned Spanish from our neighbors.
So you've gone from not knowing any Spanish, learning it from your neighbors, to now you're having ministry to Latin American men, not just in Mexico, but in South America. So maybe explain a little bit about how God has taken your very local work in Jawada and then Mochicawi and now expanded that throughout the Spanish-speaking world.
Okay. Yeah, most of our ministry had been in Mexico, primarily in Sinaloa, and really we could say, thanks to COVID, God opened up a lot of opportunity for us beyond the area where we'd been serving. I had a pastoral residency program. I had guys come in and train with us. They were bivocational for the most part because we didn't have resources to help them beyond just the training. We'd help them some. Their families would come in and they'd be with us for sometimes a period of months to maybe a year and a half. One of them was with us. But during that time, a ministry that was founded called Planted Ministries. It was founded by a group of guys that were planting blueberries in our area. I met one of the owners at the Shepherds Conference out in California. He wanted us to help evangelize field workers. They have 14,000 to 16,000 people picking blueberries that come from other parts of Mexico during the harvest. And I said, well, we can evangelize them, but where are they going to go to church? If we don't plant churches, they have nowhere to go. And he said, okay, so we got to plant churches. I said, right now I need to train more pastors because I'm not interested in planting churches and then just having them taken over by charismatics and other doctrines. So we got to have solid guys. So they decided they wanted to help us. And my last thing was farming operations don't plant churches, churches plant churches. So they formed Planted Ministries to help funnel resources into that pastoral training program, the pastoral residency program, and then to help us send out guys to plant churches. And they asked if we would expand the program with them putting some resources behind it. And all they asked was that the first churches we went on to plant would be where they were planting blueberries in Mexico and in Peru. So that really opened up the opportunity. We brought our first pastoral residents with their assistants. We'd had others prior to this, but we brought a couple guys up from Honduras that had gone to a solid seminary in Honduras that we were associated with, and where I teach every year now. And they came up with their families, had never been to Mexico. They moved their families to Mexico, got off the plane. One of the guys is rather short, and the first thing I remember his comment is, you guys are a lot taller in person than you look like on the screen. But these guys came up and trained, one of them for about 8 months, one of them for about seven months with us, 6 months with us. And then one of those families moved to the state south of Sinaloa to plant a church by a blueberry field that was just getting started. Another family moved them to Peru, about 3 hours north of Lima, and another area where they were planting blueberries, and they've started a church there. Since then, we've had another couple from Honduras train and sent to plant a church about 3 hours south of Lima, which is another area where they have blueberries. And because we've covered all of their, at least current blueberry locations, now we've started to see churches planted in other cities in Peru and Mexico through their assistance. So it really is during that time of COVID when In Latin America, it was very difficult to travel, lots of restrictions. The government reaction to COVID was much more restrictive in Latin America than it was even up here, as strange as that may seem. But I got a phone call from who was leading Planted Ministries at that time, like in July of 2020, and said, hey, Hector was one of the guys that he had been with us for about 8 months, planted a church about an hour away from us near one of their blueberry fields, and they said, well, they liked how that went. Could they assist us to expand that program so that we could plant churches in other areas? So there, and also during that time, I got online. I didn't do very much online, but pastors were calling. They were wanting to know, hey, how can we continue to do pastoral ministry? Some of these restrictions, we know we need to, be serving our church. What are some things you're doing? And what I figured out was that guys that are in a 40-mile radius or a 400-mile radius or thousands of mile radius didn't make any difference when you're in meetings online. And so our ministry expanded into South America, Central America, been to Honduras the last few years, each year. I think in the last 3.5 years, roughly, been to Peru 7 times, helping plant churches and helping the guys that we've sent out to plant churches, just helping to pastor them as they pastor these new works that the God is raising up.
All right. Well, I want to give a chance for you guys to ask questions too. So if you have questions, just raise your hand. I'm going to start with one. What are some things that maybe you're encouraged or excited about right now that's going on in the ministry?
Yeah, well, one of them would be that church plant that you all are helping us with in Los Mochis. We started that in November of last year, so 7 months more or less. We've got around 55 people attending on a Sunday evening. We do our Sunday morning services still in Mochikawi, Sunday evening there. Our church planting team is my co-pastor, 2 pastoral residents, and 2 deacons and their wives serving together in both locations. But God's raising a church up in an area of great need. We had a lot of people from the city that came out to attend church in our small town, and even from way south of the city, just because there's not solid Bible teaching in very many places. So, and the other would be the training of pastors at this stage of ministry, having the opportunity to come alongside and train pastors, have pastors come in and train them as church planters. And our pastoral residency program is very hands-on, so it's not really like a seminary program. Most of our guys have had seminary before they come. Our program is more focused on them preaching, being evaluated as they preach, doing evangelism, discipleship, counseling, and mostly taking them along with me as I do what I do, and one-on-one type training program. So it's tailored to fit the specific needs of each guy and their families, shepherding their families, to prepare their families to go out and plant churches in other locations, which there's a lot of, in pastoral ministry in general, a lot of things a family will face together. But in church planting, where you're on your own, even more so, the need to be well prepared. And then to be able to shepherd these guys as they're planting churches and be involved with them, behind them or alongside of them, but they're the face of the ministry, and I'm just their friend. And when I go into those churches to preach and different things, I'm just a friend of their pastor as far as those people are concerned. And that's really the desire that I've had, to be behind these men and see these men take the lead. And so that's been a real joy at this stage of ministry.
What would be some of the challenges you guys are facing right now?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges for me is time. The Lord has just continued to multiply opportunities for ministry and some new things that I've been involved with. There's some things that I had put off for a while and said, when I have more time, I'll try to do that. I need to take some things off my plate. Realized that wasn't going to happen, so I went ahead and took those things on. And so I have to remind myself often that when God created a 24-hour day, He said this was good, because I could use some 36-hour days. But I have to realize that if I can't get it done in the time God's given me, that there's probably some things that need to be cut out. And figuring which ones of those things need to be cut out is hard. So that's probably one of my biggest challenges at this point.
Any questions you guys have for Brian? We'd love to give you a chance. Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, I went to Calvary Bible College for my undergrad, and then I did a master's degree in biblical counseling through the Master's College and Seminary, what's now Master's University, after I was in Mexico. Did that through a modular program. So.
And then you've done some ACBC stuff as well after that, right?
Yeah, and certified with ACBC, which is an association of biblical counselors, and certified with them back in 2011. And more recently have started a process of supervising counselors that are seeking certification. In ACBC's program, they call those supervisors fellows. That was one of the things that I was invited to do a few years back and had put off for a while, but really felt that God has given me a great opportunity to be trained by some really great men, and I wanted to provide that opportunity for others, especially Spanish-speaking people that were seeking certification but had nobody to supervise them. So I'm now in the process to become a fellow, so I'm doing some supervision of counselors seeking certification underneath one of the board members. And so, also in the seminary that we brought some guys out of to plant churches in Honduras, I teach a class there. It's a 2-week modular class in biblical counseling each year in November. And then this year they asked me to put together an advanced biblical counseling course online. And so I'm in my 2nd semester. I have three semesters each year. And so on Thursday nights, teach for 2.5 hours a class. And that one, I've got students from Honduras, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Colombia, Chile. And so opportunity to shepherd some guys through some areas of pastoral ministry, aside from just the biblical counseling that goes on in that class, from all over Latin America, which has been a real joy.
So this is why some of the guys who are friends with Brian teasingly call him the evangelical pope of Latin America, because he's training all these guys in different countries. So other questions for Brian? Cody.
Yeah, our desire was to learn from neighbors in order that we could build relationships rather than going in already knowing the language. And I think they looked at us and said, if these gringos are going to make it, they really need our help. And so they did. The couple they were recently married, they lived behind us, that helped us the most. He now pastors the church in that town, and my daughter and her family are still in that town, attending and serving at that church. So yeah, we learned from the people there in the town. You know, every day was like I'd go to the hardware store. We bought a really old house that needed a lot of work, and every day was language learning. You go, you kind of use some motions and hand things and scribble things out, and you learn new words. So.
Pastor JD made the comment that there are a lot of people who speak English where we're at now, but we lived there 11 years before meeting anybody else who spoke English.
I'm gonna repeat that for people who watch later. So Danielle just added in, yeah, there's a lot of people there now in Los Mochis especially who speak English, but they lived there 11 years before they met somebody who spoke English. So it was sink or swim for you guys. Stephen.
A lot of churches nowadays kind of do small support for missionaries, and they support them in small portions. But Countryside has a different philosophy. Can you explain a little bit about just your experience of the blessings, pros and cons, and the differences, and how that's been?
Yeah, great question.
I'll just repeat that question real quick. Stephen's asking about the difference between being supported fully by one sending church as opposed to raising support from numerous churches. How's that shaped your ministry?
You know, in the early years of Countryside, as we began to look at how we are going to do missions, and there's a lot of different ways churches have chosen to do missions, but we basically came up with a philosophy that was we would send out fewer missionaries for more rather than a lot of missionaries for less. So Countryside's philosophy of missions is to train up and send out church planting pastors. And we still serve as a part of the pastoral team. I'm still a pastor elder at Countryside, living 2,000 miles away, but I'm still involved weekly in the pastors' meetings. And because they fully support us for the basic needs we have and part of the ministry needs that we have, that has freed us up to serve in a lot of ways where Traditionally, a lot of guys will come back every 4 years for a year to travel around and meet with churches and individuals and raise support to get back to the field. Sometimes we refer to that as wearing out a car in a family every 4 years. And we just felt like that maybe that's not not that that's not a way to do missions, and people can do that, and God's used that, but maybe it wasn't the best use of how we do that. And so at Countryside, we probably won't have a flag from a whole bunch of nations, but the missionaries that are sent out are fully supported. And we basically have two kinds of church planters: those that have been sent out to plant churches and will continue to be involved in church planting ministry, and those that have been sent out to plant churches, and then once that church was established, to stay there and pastor that church and raise up other church planting pastors who will plant churches, like Pastor J.D. has done here. And so we look forward to the day that God will also be raising up church planters from this body and being sent out from this body. But we count it a privilege that in the meantime, you all have chosen to be involved with us and assist us in some of those ministry efforts of church planting that we're involved in.
I know you got a lot of cake left in you, but has anybody expressed an interest in replacing you eventually? And have you thought about bringing somebody into your ministry that can do that?
Yeah, one of the things that I've done over these last years is most things that I start that are new, I only do them when I've got somebody else in mind. Maybe there's not one guy that's going to do all of the different things I'm doing, but in the different things I'm involved with, having guys being trained alongside to take those over. For instance, that class I started teaching on Thursday nights, one of my former pastoral residents who's planting a church in the state to the north of us, he was with us a year and a half. He was planting a church now in the state of Sonora. He's certified with ACBC, really great biblical counselor. And so he serves as my assistant. We call him Timothy's. And the seminary graciously gives me some support for teaching that class, and I just pass that all on to him. He does the hard part. I get the joy of teaching the class. He has to grade all the exams and all the work. So he deserves the support. But I'm doing that class because I wanted to see a solid class established, but with in mind that this could be something that would be great supplemental income for him as he's church planting, and he'd do a great job with it. So the other things I'm involved with the pastoral residency program and with pastoring, try to have guys alongside. One of the things that I was convinced of a long time ago was that I hear a lot of pastors say, I don't have time to train guys. How do you find time to train guys? And mostly what we do is we just take guys with us. Do what you're doing, but quit doing it by yourself. Sometimes a little inconvenient. You got to schedule things a little differently, especially if you got guys that are bivocational. You can work around their timetable, but bring guys along for whatever you're doing and make that a training process. They watch you do what you do things together, and then eventually, and this is the hard part for pastors, they do and you watch and evaluate. Because a lot of times as pastors, we're used to doing everything. But if we're going to see another generation of pastors raised up, we have to let them learn. And that's hard. I mean, I just as soon preach all the time, but I have to give up my pulpit to other men so that they can learn to preach and be evaluated and become better at honing the gifts that they have and being used. But that's the only way we're going to see multiple churches established, is to have more pastors trained. So. Yeah, not necessarily, but in church history, we see that a lot of pastors have been bivocational throughout church history. So in Latin America, a lot of these guys will be bivocational. A lot of guys will be bivocational in churches, especially in smaller communities where they're not able to support fully a pastoral family, and so it does limit their time. The more they have to work outside the local ministry, the more limited their time will be to shepherd. But I think in a lot of these churches, they'll have a combination of bivocational and non-bivocational pastors For the guys that we're sending out in training, one of the things we're trying to do is not just plant a church, but we're trying to strategically plant churches in areas where that church can train and be a facilitator to strengthen the church. There are places, and we've seen this happening already, where churches that have maybe started out well and veered over the years, there's some Baptist churches that were a little stronger when they started, but over the years have veered away from strong doctrine and expository preaching and things like that. We provide an opportunity to do like clinics or maybe 2-day or 1.5-day training opportunities and invite others in. We have a large conference ministry now once a year, and we bring guys in. This year we had 480 men attend that conference from all over Latin America. And we have a lot of guys coming in from churches that are maybe charismatic churches or other churches where doctrinally they haven't been as strong. And over the years we've started to have invites to go in and do training where they've started to understand the biblical concept of plurality of leadership, and they've not had that in the past. Or expository preaching, and they buy into the concept, but don't necessarily have the tools and training to do that well. So we want to plant churches. That's primarily our heart, is seeing churches planted, but also being strategic about helping other churches in the area be strengthened. If we can see churches that have veered or churches that never were very strong move towards a biblical understanding of pastoral leadership, teaching, those types of things, we count that as a win. We're kingdom players. We're all serving the same kingdom, and we want to see God's church strengthened around the globe as well as new churches established.
What are some of the biggest evangelistic challenges, or is there a dominant religion amongst those churches?
Yeah, in Latin America in general, Roman Catholicism would be strongest religion. Most people just in Mexico or a lot of Latin America would say that they were Catholic, even if they're not practicing Roman Catholic practices. They do some of the rituals. Roman Catholicism is very chameleon-like. It adjusts itself and adopts whatever the religious practices are. Like in our particular town, Mayo Indian traditional religion is mixed with Roman Catholicism. From Ash Wednesday on the Catholic Church calendar through Easter, every Friday, and then the entire week right before Easter, which they refer to as Holy Week, we have Mayo Indian dancers that wear demonic-looking masks, seed pods on their forearms and their legs, and use drums and do a lot of traditional dances. They were referred to as the Jews. And so they've mixed things they got from Catholicism, biblical terminology with unbiblical practices, because in practice, and during Semana Santa, Holy Week, thousands of dancers will come into our town from all the other communities and do these dances. And they're referred to as the Jews. They represent in their mind demonically influenced people who killed Christ. But in the entire focus of all their practices, it is these dancers who supposedly represent demonically influenced people who killed Christ who get all the attention. Parents dedicate their kids to do these dances. So the whole gospel kind of turned upside down.
I think Joe had a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe.
Thanks for your presentation. The question would be, from God's point of view, when and why did he decide to save you?
I didn't hear the question. From God's point of view, what?
From God's point of view, when and why did he decide to save you?
Okay. Well, I would say that God, from God's point of view, he decided that in eternity past. In eternity past, God chose some to receive his grace and to be a demonstration of his mercy and grace and love, while he chose to allow others to receive what we all deserve, and that is an eternity in hell, to show his justice and holiness and other attributes. And the why did he decide to save me would just be a trophy of his grace, because there's nothing in and of myself. I could say with the Apostle Paul in 1 Timothy 1:15 that he saw himself as the foremost of sinners, chief of sinners. And in that passage, he talks about the fact that he was given the gift of salvation and the opportunity to serve, to demonstrate God's mercy, to demonstrate God's grace, because there's nothing in and of ourselves. And in my own personal life, knowing where I was at and what God has done in my life, I could say there's absolutely nothing that was of value that God could use until he transformed my life. So I give him all the glory.
Any time for one more question? Yeah.
Prayer life? Is that okay? Yeah, on a daily basis, I have times of prayer that are specifically for my family and for the ministries that I'm involved in. But one of the things I've learned over the years, because of my schedule, is to take advantage of times when I'm alone. And oftentimes I have people with me, guys that I'm training, but when I'm alone, I pray a lot when I'm driving, because I drive a lot. I do pray with my eyes open, so it's helpful. At times when I'm walking through town, if I'm going from someplace, walking on the streets, and I've learned to take advantage of those times. There's been times in my life when I've had periods of fasting and prayer for specific things where I've enjoyed going out and walking. And one of those items was, I'll just share this as a testimony of God's work. Before we moved to Mexico, Countryside was meeting in a school building, and we were looking at a piece of property to purchase. It's the property where Countryside is today. And as we were praying about that piece of property, I was also praying about finding a place to live in the town of Hawata where we were planning to move to. And so those two specific things were my primary prayer concerns on Wednesdays. And so on Wednesdays, since I was fasting, I would take my lunch hour and I would just walk that entire property praying for those two specific things. I think I started that in July. And in January and February of the next year, not only did Countryside close the deal on that piece of property, fully paid for, but also we had somebody who called and said, hey, I have this home for sale in Hawata. It was the guy who, when he got saved, he gave half of his property to build a church on. He had intended to build a place to sell beer because he didn't like to have to go so far to buy beer. As we purchased that home, and the Lord provided for that, and those were two answers to that. So I think there's seasons of prayer for specific things, but also just in general, everything that we do, God directs us through prayer. We communicate with him in our prayers, and he communicates back to us through his word. So.
I'm sure you guys have more questions, and come and get to know Danielle a little bit too. We'll have a few minutes before church starts, but thank you for coming today to visit with us and also minister to us. We're looking forward to getting a chance to hear you preach in a little bit. So feel free to come up and continue the conversation, but we'll close down this time, and in about 15 minutes we'll regather for worship. Thanks.